Good evening. Could you please take your seats? Good evening, and thank you all for coming. I'm Kara McCarty, Curatorial Director of Cooper Hewitt, and I'm delighted to welcome all of you here this evening to our 7th lecture in the Enid and Lester Morse Historic Design Lecture Series. This wonderful public program was established in 2011 through an inspired gift from our dedicated trustee, Dinnie Morse, and her husband Lester. Their unstinting support for the collection and tremendous generosity has allowed us to bring important design scholars to Cooper Hewitt, such as Jules Stern, Carolyn Sargentson, Cheryl Buckley, and Rainier Barzan, to share the latest research on design history from the Renaissance up to the present day, and shed new light on significant works in our rich and diverse collection of over 210,000 objects. Yes, wow. And most of them you can actually find online now. We have digitized more than 180,000 of our collection. It's online, so please jump on cooperhewitt.org and enjoy browsing the museum's collection. I just had the pleasure of meeting this evening's speaker, Jacob Moss, who arrived from London 24 hours ago. And this is his first visit to New York. In fact, it's his first visit to the United States. And I also learned that he has not done much traveling up until now because of a fear of flying. And so I'm hoping that this is the beginning of a new chapter in your career. I also understand tomorrow Jacob will be going out to the museum's storage area in New Jersey with our conservation staff and curators to look at the museum's fan collection. Jacob Moss, curator of the Fan Museum in London, will speak to us on the history of European fan painting. Sharing highlights from both Cooper Hewitt's and the Fan Museum's collections, Jacob will give a guided tour of the golden age of fan painting and share the latest findings on the exceptional talents of the draftsmen, painters, and craftsmen who elevated these fashionable accessories into works of art. Cooper Hewitt holds over 300 folding fans, fan leaves, and designs for fan leaves in its collection, including a magnificent 18th century pleated cabriole fan currently on view in the Hewitt Sisters exhibition on the museum's 2nd floor. We are thrilled Jacob is with us tonight to share his expertise and research. He became the curator of the Fan Museum after receiving a master's degree in fashion curation from the London College of Fashion, and most recently oversaw the curation and installation of Treasures of the Fan Museum. On view through June 5th, the exhibition celebrates the museum's 25th anniversary and its extraordinary holdings of over 5,000 fans and fan leaves. The only museum of its kind in the United Kingdom, the Fan Museum's conservation efforts, research activities, and special exhibitions have contributed to a greater awareness and appreciation of the fan's breadth of creative expression. I know very little about fans, so I'm really looking forward to tonight's talk. Please join me in welcoming Jacob.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction and for mentioning my fear of flying, which I think actually might be coming to an end now, I have to say. It's wonderful to be here in New York. This is my first visit. Wonderful weather, wonderful food, and so lovely to meet you all and find so many fan enthusiasts amongst you. So I'm hoping this should be easy work for me tonight. So, ladies and gentlemen, my presentation this evening is on the topic of European fan painting. Encompassing over 250 years of creativity, fan painting is an intriguing art form, and until recent times relatively overlooked and in turn misunderstood, the Cooper Hewitt's collection of over 300 folding fans includes numerous top quality painted examples, and I'll be presenting a number of interesting pieces from a collection which illustrates the development and diversity of fan painting over the course of time. You'll also be seeing some of the Fan Museum's treasures. As you kindly mentioned, the UK's only museum dedicated to the history of fans and craft of fan making has an exceptional collection, even if I do say so myself, of over 5,000 fans and fan leaves, dating from the 12th century to the present day. The discipline of fan painting, I feel, is best described as a transitional art form, subject to the vagaries of fashion and taste, and throughout history, more often maligned than exalted. And at this point I quote from the London Tradesman of 1747. Fan painting is an ingenious, trifling branch of the painting business. It requires no great fancy, nor much skill in drawing or painting to make a workman. A glare of colour is more necessary than a polite intervention. This somewhat flippant evaluation is one repeated time and again, and it would seem there was no greater slur than in comparing fine artist to fan painter. And Diderot does exactly this in 1760 when he accuses Boucher of slipping into mannerism, and he says he has become a fan painter. He has only two colours left, white and red. Make of that what you will. And according to MacIver Percival, author of the Fan Book, written in 1921, well-painted fans are graceful in composition, delicate in colour, charming in sentiment, but lack the touch of greatness. Okay. And so, it's against a climate of disparagement and artistic snobbery that fan painters come to ply their trade. We will discover, however, that contrary to the view expressed in the London Tradesman by Diderot and MacIver, fan painters throughout the ages often demonstrated a lightness of touch which rivaled the very best miniaturists, and an ability to adapt rectangular compositions to better suit the fan-shaped leaf. Bear with me. And we're off. Okay. So, throughout the courts of Europe, the wearing of fans gained momentum during the 16th century. Contemporary portraits, such as these two portraits here, show women wearing fixed fans with handles wrought of metal, set with ostrich plumes. A type we've come to describe at the Fan Museum as the feather duster, a very glamorous one at that. But by the close of the 17th century, folding fans, widely acknowledged as a Japanese invention, have superseded fixed fans to become indispensable costume accessories. More than simply cooling devices, they were symbols of wealth and status. Folding fans were a canvas upon which every facet of life itself seems to have been recorded, from classical subjects to royal births, marriages, and scenes of everyday life. A fan unfolded reveals much about the time and place during which it was at first fluttered. So, what are the reasons why women took up folding fans with such fervour? On a practical basis, they were supremely portable, compact when closed, and could be set to a diverse range of uses. On a cultural level, fans offered an element of surprise, of spectacle, and actually a lot of opportunities for non-verbal communication, as observed by Joseph Addison, who famously remarked, "Women are armed with fans, as men are with swords, and sometimes do more execution with them." Make of that what you will. Now, in order to understand fully the transitional nature of fan painting, I feel it's probably best presented as a chronological sequence comprising of distinct phases, which in itself presents me with a number of problems. For example, it's not uncommon to discover fans assembled from parts made during different periods. And often, fan painters were inclined to imitate the decorative styles of previous epochs, and sometimes with enough credibility to muddy the water even further. Similarly, identifying where fans were made is quite often a complex task. It's worth bearing in mind the trade in fans was very much transcontinental. England, for example, imported fan leaves painted in Italy and quantities of sticks from China. And the fan illustrated is one example whereby an Italian leaf has been matched to an English monture. And it's also entirely possible the leaf was in fact painted by an Italian working in England, which brings me on to mention the movement of people involved in the fan trade. Whatever the cause of movement, be that unavoidable displacement, more of that later, or freely chosen, with regards to fan painters, it may often develop these hybridized styles of painting, which are not easily assignable to one nation or another. All things considered, the first phase I would describe as a period of consolidation, beginning in the mid-17th century and moving through into the early part of the 18th century. And it's during this time that fan painting really begins to flourish, and centres of excellence emerge in France, Holland, Italy, amongst others, but it will be some time yet before English fan painters began to compete with their continental counterparts. And so we start with a number of early painted fans, the first of which dates from circa 1681 and forms part of the Fan Museum's permanent display. Okay, we're going to start with quite an unusual piece, but I will explain it and all will become clear. Painted in body colour on vellum and mounted onto a wooden panel, the scene depicted is of the Grand Dauphin's 20th birthday celebration and is notable for the inclusion of King Louis XIV and Queen Marie-Thérèse, who sit, as you might expect, centre stage on thrones. It's interesting to note, if you cast your eye along the whole of the fan, all of the ladies are wearing folding fans. So that's an indication that by this time, 1681, folding fans were an essential part of court apparel. Now, at first glance, the work appears to be nothing more than a small painting of rectangular form. But look closer, and the boundaries of the fan leaf, which I very handily for you highlighted in red, can be clearly discerned from the surrounding areas. Now, when a fan leaf is transformed into a rectangular painting, we refer to it as an extended fan leaf. Oddly enough, a relatively large number of 17th century French fan paintings have been adapted in this manner. To explain this occurrence, we should consider the conditions under which fan painters in Paris operated around this time. In the capital city of France, fan painting began to attain a high degree of perfection under the patronage of Louis XIV, who in 1678 sanctioned the establishment of a guild of master fan makers, the Communauté des Éventaillistes. Fan painters who belonged to the guild were not permitted to make and sell works in any form other than fan paintings. The suggestion, therefore, is that in painting extended fan leaves, guild members found a way in which they might negotiate those restrictions without fear of reprisal, which might have resulted in a costly fine. And we need to bear in mind that fan painters were not earning a good living, so avoiding fines would have been high on the agenda. Now, what's more, this particular fan leaf and others like it shows no sign of having ever been pleated. And although there is little attempt to colour match the leaf and extension in this case, often it's almost impossible to distinguish the point at which the fan leaf and the extension meet, which suggests that the work to both was completed contemporaneously by the same hand. Now, I think it's worth mentioning also at this point that many fan painters at this time and throughout the 18th century operated outside of the guild structure and included a significant number of women. And it would seem only in France were fan painters quite so rigidly controlled. And while the painted fan was an accessory coveted by the aristocracy, the painters of fans were simply facilitators, generally working anonymously, rarely signing, and of whom we still know relatively little about. Why fan painters didn't sign their works is not entirely understood, as most other forms of decorative art bear either a signature or an insignia. I suspect one of the reasons might well be to do with legitimacy. For example, if there was no legal entitlement to make and sell fan paintings, we can assume the artist would have wanted to do so with caution in order to avoid the attention of the guild regulators. So in this context, the signature rather acts like a fingerprint, tying perpetrator to crime. Okay, so the process of preparing, painting and assembling fans I think is best described and illustrated in Diderot's Encyclopedia, first published in 1765. This is one of two engravings I'm going to show you, which show a largely female workforce engaged in activities such as the preparation and gluing of the arc-shaped fan papers, and that's what you can see happening here. The small room in which the women work is sparsely furnished and indicates the lowly status accorded to those working on preparatory aspects of fan production. In contrast, the setting in which the fan painter exercises her trade appears reasonably comfortable. The room is well lit, and the furnishings give the impression of a domestic dwelling. Sitting at a desk, she is probably copying onto a fan leaf a design set within the arc-shaped frame in front of her. Now, in general, fan painters were more likely to take their cue from engraved copies of master paintings than to execute original designs. Fan painters were masters in the art of adaptation and thought nothing of reinventing a rectangular composition to better suit the arc-shaped fan leaf. Now, in order to unify the composition, modifications might include displacement of figures, a distortion of the horizon, and the introduction of ornamental motifs to the outer reaches of the leaf, again, to bring some sense of unity to it. Now, this particular fan demonstrates perfectly the fan painter's skill in adaptation. Painted in gouache on a dark skin leaf, the subject depicted is the Battle of Arbela, or Alexander versus Darius, after a painting by Cortona, painted between 1644 and 1655. So if you just keep this painting in your mind, we're going to kind of go straight back to the fan. So you can see the theatricality of the artist's original composition, with its seething mass of warring figures and horses, has been faithfully replicated on the leaf of the fan. The subject is presented as an asymmetric composition in which the battle scene seems to surge across the leaf from left to right, and you might be surprised to find a subject such as this portrayed without compromise upon an article, well, widely considered as inherently feminine. But read between the pleats, and we discover that each and every fan painting is a highly nuanced declaration of identity and morality. And so in this respect, nothing is ever left to chance. The figure of Alexander the Great, who is, I suppose, the main protagonist on this fan, is, throughout history, one closely associated with heroism and virtue, a beacon of masculinity, to whom men undoubtedly aspired, and I'm thinking, again, Louis XIV, and women, I think it's safe to assume, may have desired. So, if this was a fan that was gifted by a gentleman to a woman, he is aligning himself with Alexander the Great, I suspect. So there's always a message in this painting. Do excuse me for drinking water. I woke up this morning with absolutely horrendous cold, so bear with me, I do apologise. Now, we move on. This is one of my favourites from the Fan Museum collection. It's an absolute beauty, and actually it reproduces very well in large scale, so that's good. For inspiration, fan painters look with particular regularity to classical subjects. Fans painted with stories from Greek and Roman mythology conveyed an air of cultural enlightenment and, of course, facilitated socially appropriate conversations. The Judgment of Paris is perhaps the most commonly represented of all the Greek myths. The concept of beauty, triumphing above all other worldly concerns, I suspect chimes just as strongly today as it did throughout the long 18th century. Now, this fan offers a traditional interpretation of the Greek myth, with the hero Paris presenting the golden apple to Venus, the victor, in this beauty contest like no other. Now let me show you some detail on the sticks, which are quite exceptional. The decoration applied to the sticks leaves us in no doubt that this is a fan connected in every which way to affairs of the heart. Each of the sticks carries an amorous motif and an inscription such as, I'll give you just a couple, "I seek the brunette." Very specific. And "I cry for your absence." Now, in comparing this fan with its motifs of vanity and desire with that of the previous example showing the violence of warfare, we gain a sense of how fan painters oscillated between different subjects and themes, always interpreted them according to the cultural and artistic conventions of the period. Now, the Judgment of Paris, I did say the Judgment of Paris was depicted with regularity on fans. This is one of two that I'm showing you. It's the subject for this fan, which has on the obverse. And for those of you who aren't used to the word obverse, it's slightly archaic, but I've come to get used to it at the Fan Museum. It just means front, effectively. But we tend not to use front and back because sometimes it's not clear which is which with fans. So we use obverse and reverse. This has a beautifully, delicately rendered sepia ink drawing, and the fan painter took his cue from an oil painting by Carl Maratta, who in turn might have based his painting on an earlier engraving by Raimondi after Raphael. You can kind of see the similarity if you look at the main figure group, the three goddesses, and we go back again, you can kind of see how it comes along. And so, in identifying the fan painter's source materials, we start to construct these interlinking routes of artistic appropriation, from master painting to fan, and most often via print. And it's just fascinating to see how different artists beg, steal, and borrow from another, because it's happening so much with fans. And now we're moving on to the first of our Cooper Hewitt examples. And in addition to pleated fans, there's another type of folding fan that enjoyed widespread popularity at an early date. Brise fans typically comprise of a series of uniformly tapered blades, usually of one material, such as ivory, secured at the top edge by an interweaving cord or ribbon. They were initially imported to the West via China, and by the second half of the 17th century, both the Dutch and the French were crafting very high quality versions. So the designs were usually painted in either an oil-based medium, or gouache, or even tempera, and sometimes they were lacquered with transparent varnish, which not only protected the paintwork, but it heightened the colouring. Now, this is one of the Cooper Hewitts as well, and it's very typical, in fact, that it fuses decorative styles from both East and West. Typically early 18th century example, opening to a wedge shape. The upper section are usually painted with classical, biblical, or genre subjects, while the lower part, if we're going to use fan terminology, the gorge and the guard sticks generally feature chinoiserie motifs, scrollwork, and vignettes. Now, if we turn now to look at a split screen showing two sides of the same fan, you can see on the right-hand side only on the reverse, that is, only the outlines of a design are visible. Given the translucency of each wafer-thin blade, I wonder if the outlines were not used as a guide for painting the obverse. That's to say the outward public side of the fan. Now, I'm not aware of any documentation which details the techniques used to paint brise fans, but someone's going to come up to me after this lecture and tell me there are. But logic does suggest the blades were laid out in the correct order, the design was outlined, painted in, possibly varnished, and then assembled once dry. I'll let you have a, just take this fan in because while I have some water, it's an absolute beauty, and I'm delighted to be talking about this. So, this is a real gem from the Cooper Hewitt collection, and one that I've spent quite a lot of time looking at, poring over, umming and ahhing as you do. I can see Lucy smiling there. We've had a conversation or two about this one, and I'm really looking forward. I'm hoping I'm going to see this tomorrow. Fantastic. Now, before I talk about the subjects depicted on the double leaf, I'd like to address some concerns regarding manufacture. Okay, so look closely at the top of the leaf, and you'll notice, and I've been kind to you, I've circled them, you'll notice the ribs which support the pleats perforate and extend beyond the edge. At the opposite end, if you take your eyes down to the lower end, the lower border appears to have been cut away and subsequently repainted onto the sticks. Now, this is an indication that this current configuration is perhaps not the original arrangement. Now, relatively large sums of money were spent on fans of this quality, and so if either sticks or leaf sustained damage, it would have made perfect sense to seek some form of repair. Certainly, the practice of remounting fan leaves is not uncommon, and in fact, many fan makers' trade cards publicise their willingness to undertake repairs of this kind. Whether or not this is an original configuration does not detract from what is, in my opinion, a unique example of fan artistry. The double parchment leaf has on both sides pen and ink drawings of contrasting subjects, probably, no, in fact, definitely, by different artists. The obverse, this side, perhaps excites the most. The surface of the leaf is built up with layers of meticulous cross-hatching, reminiscent of engraving. I found myself asking, is this the work of a fan painter or a fine artist? The quality of the penwork suggests an exceptional draftsman, but, as with most fans of the period, the leaf bears no signature. And believe me when I say I have had 10 different magnifying glasses scouring the leaf for a signature, because actually when fans were signed at this point in time, fan painters were very naughty. They used to hide their signatures in really unusual places. I think they knew we would be doing this in 300 years' time, searching for their signatures. So you find them in the most illogical places, but believe me, I've given it more than a once over. I don't think there's any signature, which is a real shame, because I just got a feeling that this is by somebody great. Maybe we can do some further research on this in time to come. The subject depicted is not one I've encountered before on fans, and shows a story from Greek mythology, the Harpies harassing Phineus, the king of Thrace. The story unfurls around a central feasting table, above which the Boreads hurtle into battle with a mob of characteristically grotesque-looking harpies. And they really are quite revolting. I think that's why I love it. It's so different. Now, this is the gorge of the fan, and the sticks carry this wonderfully freely painted Rococo design, possibly a slightly later edition. Reminiscent actually of similar studies by a German-born artist, Franz Habermann, and actually the Cooper Hewitt has quite a lot of Habermann's work. There's something on display upstairs, which you can see how the work is extremely similar. So we're looking at 1730s, 1740s, I think. Okay. Okay, on to the reverse. Yeah, it's not easy to make out because it's a sepia drawing, but I hope you can kind of see what's happening. We have a classic Grand Tour subject, the Italian Veduta. In this instance, we see a beautifully detailed view of the city of Rome, with several prominent landmarks numbered and conversely listed in a medallion on the far right of the leaf. All but one of the landmarks have been identified, and that's very useful because it enables us to narrow the date of production down a bit, because some of these buildings weren't built at such a time and not until. So we've been able to get the dating down, I think, to around 1700 to 1730. And around this time, many of the best topographical artists active in Rome were in fact Dutch. And this sketch evokes, to my mind, someone called Van Vitelli, his detailed drawings of the city of Rome. And you can see Van Vitelli's drawing on the left and the fan on the right. And if you just take a moment to look at those, you can, I think, get a sense that there's definitely a correlation between the two styles and the pen work. Okay. So the next two fans I'd like to present share a number of similarities, suggesting both, and I'm going to stick my neck on the line here, both come from the same workshop. I'm really quite sure of this. And interestingly, one's from the Fan Museum and one's from the Cooper Hewitt. So I like this link we're making. The Fan Museum example is painted on the obverse with the Visitation of the Virgin Mary, who is depicted approaching an elderly Saint Elizabeth, with Zacharias greeting Joseph on the left. Now, fans such as this, reasonably simply crafted, there's not much concession to decoration here, and painted with an Old Testament subject, I suspect probably designed to be worn at church. Now, the identification of the fan painting provided yet another opportunity to construct a chain of artistic appropriation. I love this kind of work. It's kind of investigative work, and when you can make these links from the fan to the painting, you really feel like you're getting somewhere. And on this case, you can see here an oil sketch on the left, painted by Rubens in 1632, and it's followed so closely on the leaf of a fan, and then you have an engraving above it, which I suspect would have been the engraving that was used by the fan painter. Now, onwards, the Cooper Hewitt fan, and I've tried to select fans for you actually, but some of them are slightly unusual and unique in their type. And this is really quite different, this fan. It's painted with kind of fluidity, which I don't think you usually see on fans of this period, and it's quite beautiful, but less success in identifying the subject or the source. But I'm reasonably sure the figure on the left represents Flora, the goddess of flowers, who bears more than a passing resemblance to Rubens' Flora, painted in 1625. Very similar. So, I'd like to take a moment to talk about the side of the fan usually facing inward, and the ways in which fan painters adorned the side less seen. Now, in general, the reverse, if at all painted, would carry a subject secondary to that of the obverse, and might only consist of a hastily brushed vignette of figures or of a landscape, more often than not executed by a moderately talented painter. Some of the finer quality fans of the late 17th and 18th century, however, are painted on the reverse with charming floral arrangements. And this is the reverse of the fan we just saw. And I think very reminiscent of the gilt leather wall coverings that were also produced in the Netherlands at a similar date. Weddings. Weddings provided an occasion for the wearing of fans more lavish than otherwise might have been considered appropriate within a church setting. And in the 18th century, increasingly elaborate fans were made to commemorate betrothal and marriage ceremonies. And as a consequence, it became traditional for brides and their attendants to carry fans at weddings. And although the leaf of this fan has suffered the effects of time, it is nevertheless very well painted with an allegory of marriage. The two central figures sport classical dress and are probably, no doubt, intended to represent Venus and Mars. They stand before the altar of love, with Hymen, the god of marriage, presiding over this union between beauty and valour. The same union is represented on this fan, dating from the mid-18th century. Now, we've arrived at a period synonymous with high-quality fan painting, and as fans grew, both in scale and span, fan leaves offered unparalleled opportunities to demonstrate artistic brilliance. In this instance, the composition is derived from a painting of Venus and Mars by a Dutch artist. And Venus is shown semi-recumbent, her breast exposed, and Mars totally beguiled. The Amorini toying with his weaponry, and we see this a lot on this type of allegory, is a symbol of his disarmament, I suppose his capitulation to Venus. Now, staying with the classical world, this lavish mid-18th century fan really embodies the artistry of the fan painter during this golden age of fan painting. And I have to say, I think this is one of the Cooper Hewitt's greatest fan treasures. It really is a beauty. The parchment leaf is painted with the story of Virginia. First recounted by the Roman historian Livy, Virginia's story centres upon themes of violated honour and matrimonial fidelity. But what really elevates this fan above others is the way in which the fan painter animates the entire leaf with narrative detail and cleverly arranges the subject matter on different planes to create this sense of depth of field, which is really quite difficult to achieve on a semicircle fan leaf. Light and shade too, as you can see, interplay beautifully. The story's main protagonists, Virginia and Marcus, are picked out in this kind of passage of bright pastel tonality, while the outer subordinate areas of the leaf appear to shrink away into shadow. And for me, this is one of those rare examples where a fan painter creates the illusion of having conceived the painting as a fan shape, rather than an adaptation of a rectangular composition. That's a bit of the detail, so you can really kind of get to see the quality of the painting. Now, the classical world continued to offer inspiration, but the diversification of subjects and themes accelerated as time moved on. And the second half of the 18th century saw fan painters turn with increasing regularity to the pastoral and the romantic world evoked by artists such as Watteau, Boucher, Lancret and Patin. The artists which fan painters now emulated were almost exclusively French. And that kind of mirrors the status of France as the leading, kind of the epicentre of the fan trade at this time and thereafter. The second half of the 18th century also heralds a different approach to painting relief, as fan painters increasingly treated the art less as a continuous surface and more of a kind of surface to disrupt and divide. And so, elaborate cartouches of varying size and shape now adorn the leaf and provided opportunities to imitate and blend the style of several popular artists at once. So this trompe-l'oeil fan, designed to deceive the eye, is typical of its kind and features a medley of gilt-framed cartouches resembling prints and paintings. Now the blue background carries sprigs of flowers and a painted ribbon of lace, which actually interweaves and kind of in turn unifies this kind of arrangement of cartouches. The fan painter exploits the format well and pays homage to Jean-Baptiste Patin, who I've mentioned already, whose painting of a romantic couple he recreates in the central cartouche. So I'd also like now to take a moment to bring in England and acknowledge the contribution of English fan painters who, at points during the 18th century, were painting fans which rival the very best quality of the French and Italian examples. This was not, however, always the case, as the craft of fan making in England only really begins to flourish in the years following the revocation of the Edict of Nantes in 1675, Now that's an event which precipitated an influx of Huguenot craftspeople to the city of London, escaping religious persecution in France. So as if to prove a point, this block-printed fan commemorating the restoration of the monarchy demonstrates a simplicity quite at odds with fans painted in Italy and France at a similar date. England's position, though, as a leading centre of fan painting was relatively short-lived. The rise as rapid as the decline. We gain a sense of the transitory nature of England's fan trade in a fascinating pamphlet which I recently discovered. I say discovered, the Fan Museum where I'm the curator, it came to auction, this exceedingly rare pamphlet. And we did put in quite a large bid. So unfortunately we were outbid, but I was able to track down the person who got the object, and they were very kind in sending me over a photocopy of it. So I kind of thought we had a lucky escape. We got the pamphlet and we didn't pay for it. All is well. But, so this pamphlet is fascinating. It's written by a fan painter, which is, as I said, fan painters did not have a voice. We really didn't hear from them. They were just busy toiling away, painting fans. So to have something from the 18th century written by a fan painter is wonderful for us. Entitled, wait for it, deep breath, Observations on the Rise, Progress and Present Declining State of the Fan Trade. I've abbreviated it. The author outlines the various challenges faced by those involved in the production of fans in England at this time. We learn that the business of painting fans involved artists of several denominations. So we had painters of Roman and history subjects, we had painters of birds, flowers, and those that just stuck to ornamental borders. We also learned that on the continent, and I really do like this bit, English fans were generally held in high regard. The author writes, "Our fans became known abroad. We sent them into Holland and all over Germany, to Spain, and even to Italy. When the English fans came to be seen there, they were found to be made up in so good a taste that we had orders for great quantities." Now, perhaps most significantly, the author offers an explanation for the sudden demise of fan painting in England. He begins an entertaining diatribe in which he suggests that the rising popularity of printed fans, which he refers to as the evil, by the way, triggered the ruination of the fan painter. He comments, I love this one, "The lady of quality down to the kitchen maid were pleasing themselves with the cheapness of their bargains." We also learn that fan prints were often coloured by fan painters, who, again in the words of the author, were constrained to do that rather than perish. This is probably an appropriate moment to look at one of these evils. And anything but, I think you'll agree. So, now this is something of a rarity. The leaf of this English fan carries an engraved design which has been overpainted in watercolour. A central mask is probably, with peepholes, cutaway eye holes, is probably the most striking element of this rather playful model, designed specifically to appeal to the Spanish market, of which I think only 6 or 7 examples, each a variant of the other, are thought to have survived. I think there's one in the Met, and some private collectors have some, and maybe one up at Boston. I'm not entirely sure. I can't. Yeah, some, yes. Yeah, good. At least we've got our fan experts here. Now, what really strikes me as interesting is at the very same time the author of this pamphlet is lamenting the demise of his trade, England's fan painters were producing some of their very finest work. This fan, I think you'll agree, is the epitome of Englishness. The Obverse painted with a Gainsborough-inspired scene of dalliance and dancing, which takes place within a romanticised rural setting. So this and many other English fans of the period feature on the reverse side designs painted in the chinoiserie manner. The paintings certainly vary in quality, but usually combine figures in a landscape interspersed with peonies and branches of blossom. Another one. Look closely, and you can see the ribs of the sticks. The ribs are the part of the stick that intersects the fan leaf and kind of gives it support. And when that indicates the leaf is single, and we would say mounted à l'anglaise, we use a lot of French terminology. I just really don't think there's any English equivalent. And it sounds lovely anyway. So. The ribs are usually overpainted and incorporated into the design, although little care is given to colour matching, as often the ribs are painted in tones completely different to that of the leaf. Now, time for another gem from a Cooper Hewitt. So as the century progressed, the taste for chinoiserie certainly grew, peaking around 1770, and at this time, fans are painted with ever more fanciful designs, which conjure this kind of perceived exoticism, which the Far East continue to evoke in the minds of Europeans. This striking French fan, with chinoiserie vignettes after Jean-Baptiste Pillement, is very much of its kind. The caricature-like figures are unmistakably European in appearance, and are really only identifiable as Chinese by their costume, which in itself is more Gilbert and Sullivan than anything, but much earlier. The blue ground is a very interesting one, which is painted with these wonderful little sprays of flowers in a style I think many of you will agree reminiscent of Sèvres, the porcelain. In fact, at this time Sèvres produced wares in a similarly distinctive colour called bleu celeste. And it's actually via Sèvres that we learn the names of a number of 18th century fan painters. For it would seem many who went to work at the porcelain factory in a previous life were fan painters. So from biographical records we learn of a Monsieur Bachelier, one of almost 20 fan painters called in to work on porcelain, and who specialised in a minor genre of flower painting, and of Felix Alexander, employed at Sèvres as a landscape painter, but prior to this he is known to have painted ornamental borders on fans. Now, if I can take you back once more to ancient Rome, and to a subject depicted on fans with almost as much frequency as the Judgment of Paris. Throughout the history of art, Aurora, the goddess of the dawn, is usually depicted racing across the sky with Apollo's horse-drawn chariot in hot pursuit, surrounded by a coterie of graceful figures personifying the hours. Now, this finely painted fan from the Cooper Hewitt collection replicates in miniature Guido Reni's fresco of Aurora and her companions at the Casino dell'Aurora in Rome. Now, the fan painter applies a stipple technique, which is typical of Italian fan painting. And actually, when you get in close, you see it's very reminiscent of pointillism. I'll just go back once more so you can really kind of see the similarity in the composition between the two. Now, moving on. Perhaps only Guercino's fresco of the same subject, with Staying with Aurora, rivals Reni's in terms of impact. Painted only a few years after Reni's masterpiece, the composition follows a similar path, with Aurora and her retinue tearing across the sky. An unmounted fan leaf on permanent display at the Fan Museum carries a painting after Guercino's version, and forms part of a set of 3 fan-shaped paintings which are without doubt by the same artist. And at the start of my research for this presentation, each of these 3 works were attributed to an Italian artist who went by the name of Antonio Poggi, who worked in London from 1776 to 1799. But after discovering a similar fan painting in the collection of the Cooper Hewitt, only this time dubiously attributed, and I think we agree now, Lucy, yeah, to Vigilibrun. I think we both got it. Both museums got this one wrong. I went in search of the unidentified suspect, who I understood to be the artist responsible for actually painting not only the Fan Museum's 3 works, but the Cooper Hewitt's work, which we'll now have a look at. So, executed in a similar style as the Fan Museum's leaf. The Cooper Hewitt's example features a central cartouche painted with an allegory of night, also after Guercino. Guercino's fresco paintings were clearly admired, as the Fan Museum has this same subject. Again, I only discovered this a few weeks ago. With 5,000 fans in the collection, things do go under the radar, it has to be said. But Mrs. Alexander, who's the director of the Fan Museum, I showed her this, and she brought this out. So you can see, it's exactly the same subject, but on a mounted fan. So here are all the four designs together to give you a kind of idea of how they share so many similarities. Now they're all painted in gouache, on fine skin, in a very precise style, probably designed to appeal to grand tourists. Each of the work features at least one cartouche with a classical subject, surrounded by an architectural framework with intricate beaded borders and a fanciful array of Neo-Pompeian ornaments. Now a high level of detail suggests to me that fan-shaped paintings such as this were not always designed to be made up as fans, and in fact were supposed to be enjoyed in this, their unadulterated form. Now, each of the observations I've just relayed are characterising traits of a style of painting associated with Thomas Bigatti. I might be wrong, it might be Bigatti, but I apologise for that. He's an Italian artist known to have painted a number of fans during his lifetime, and none of the work, but unfortunately, as none of these works are signed, attribution, I think we have to err on the side of caution, and we'll say School of Bigatti for the moment. I'm going to stick my neck out. I think it's him, and so this is one of his works, which really shows you his style. I mean, this superb wall decoration combines all of the decorative elements you see on the fans and more. Now, that really brings us to the close of the 18th century, and we're going to move on a little bit now. And fans now echoed, this is right at the end of the 18th and into the 19th century, that kind of a blend of both centuries. Fans now echoed a pronounced shift in fashion from the excess and frivolity of Rococo to the refined and elegant aesthetics of the neoclassical and empire styles. And with many of France's skilled fan makers either lost to or fighting in the Napoleonic Wars, fan production, as a consequence, became less work-intensive. And so the painted fan is cast aside in favour of smaller models with textile leaves embellished with sequins, or brises such as this, made of pressed horn. This has been stained to resemble tortoiseshell, and it's been painted with swags of forget-me-nots. Charming as this is, it has none of the impact of the grandiose 17th, 18th century fans. Now we move ever onwards, swiftly onwards. It's not until the second half of the 19th century that the painted fan truly reasserts its status as an essential costume accessory, reinvented as the ultimate feminine symbol of luxury and excess. No doubt encouraged by Eugénie, Empress of the French, herself an avid wearer of fans, the fashion conscious and the moneyed took up the fan with unabashed fervour. Paris's temples of spectacle, its balls, opera houses and theatres once more were aflutter with painted fans of the finest quality. The Empress is known to have favoured one of the celebrated fan makers of the period, Felix Alexander, who, alongside his equally esteemed rival Gauguin, assembled a coterie of gifted painters, many of whom exhibited at the Paris Salon, in an altogether different league to the professional fan painters of the previous century. The likes of Moreau, Lamy, Parmentier, they readily signed their exquisite confections, and in doing so, they bestowed upon the discipline of fan painting a credibility and status hitherto attained. Now, fans at this time tend to be painted with great finesse, albeit in a kind of traditional, rather academic style. The leaves emblazoned with pastiche subjects after Watteau, or perhaps bevies of cherubs, or sprays of full-blown roses. Now, this is a period of conspicuous consumption of the newly moneyed who sought ways in which to wear their wealth and success, and this is accurately reflected in the fans. And I'm going to be controversial here, because if I were to make any criticism of fans painted at this time, I might perhaps call into question that rather subjective notion of taste, and that space in which excess and luxury collide. We need to keep a critical eye, I think, with fans, because, you know, it's good to do that from time to time. As the century progressed, as the century drew to a close, the painted fan once more diminished in importance, only to be usurped by the feathered and printed variety. Fan painters, whom now included among their ranks an increasing number of amateurs, favoured a sentimental, highly feminised style of painting, typified by a proliferation of flower subjects. I have to say, this is a really nice example of that style. And it's by someone known as Biote. The sisters Biote were celebrated for their distinctive arrangements of flowers, painted fluidly in pastel shades. And although at least 3 of them are known to have painted fans, only Aileen Valery achieved notoriety and worked often for Juveloir and Keys. And here is another of Biote's rather lovely fans. Okay, the final 2 works I'd like to present in many ways sit outside of the tradition of fan painting, but nevertheless are 2 of the Fan Museum's greatest treasures. At the very same time Alexander was bringing to fan painting salon exhibited artists, another group of painters working outside of the established order were also drawn to the discipline. To explain the involvement of fine artists within the story of fan painting, we should look eastward, and in particular toward Japan. After Commodore Perry forcibly reopened Japan to the West in 1858, ending a sustained period of self-imposed isolation, into Europe came quantities of Japanese woodblock prints, sculpture, lacquerware, and of course, fans. Artists such as Degas, Toulouse-Lautrec, and Gauguin began to experiment with fan painting, perhaps recognising in this unique format a creative challenge, which required an approach quite unlike that of the rectangular canvases upon which they're usually painted. With little regard for convention, fine artists executed fan paintings in which compositions appear to float freely, moving beyond the boundaries of the fan leaf. Take, for example, this design for a fan by Paul Gauguin, painted in 1887. Depicting a Martinique landscape, the art becomes a window into which the viewer gazes. During his lifetime, Gauguin painted over 20 fan designs. His only visit to the island of Martinique, by all accounts, was fraught with illness. However, it must have made an impression because he paints this almost a year after on his return to Paris. And boy, does he recreate that kind of tropical idyll. And I can tell you, on a grey winter London morning, when you walk into the room where this is and you open the doors and you're just, transported. We finish with a fan painting by a less feted artist than Gauguin, but equally gifted. Sickert, notorious for his impressionistic, visceral portraits of London's working ladies, painted this fan for a fellow artist and friend, Florence Pash. Entitled Little Dot Hetherington at the Old Bedford Theatre, the work is based on an earlier painting forming part of a celebrated Old Bedford series, which included lithographs, oil paintings and etchings. And in fact, the painting which precedes this is an exceptional painting, and it's just such a shame it's gone into private ownership in Monaco, never to be seen again, I'm sure. But anyway, in contrast to the studied approach of the professional fan painters, here the painters applied to the mount in a spontaneous manner, drawn back and forth across the pleated surface. Using a restrained, sombre colour palette, Sickert evokes beautifully the smoke-filled arena of the music hall. Now, the ethereal figure in the spotlight is Little Dot, a young jobbing actress of Creole descent, another one who we don't really know very much about. She never quite made it in the way that her competitor Marie Lloyd did. But actually, if you look at her, she's doing something quite pronounced. She's pointing upward. And this is a take on a well-known musical song, The Boy I Love Is Up in the Gallery. But like the painting by Gauguin, Sickert's fan operates as a window into which the viewer glimpses a fleeting moment. And just like the figures depicted in at the outer recesses of the leaf, we too are brought into this picture. I think we become the theatre audience with them. I should like to finish by saying that the creative discipline of fan painting is a vast territory of which much remains unexplored. And although I've been with the Fan Museum now for just over 5 years, I still have this sense of standing on the tip of one gigantic iceberg. In short, in the time I've been presenting this evening, my hope really is only to have offered some insights into the diversity and the culture of fan painting, and have shown fans to be much more than so-called, and I hate this, ladies' trifles. But instead, they are authentic cultural barometers. I hope also to have presented the case for reviewing the traditionally upheld status of fan painters as simply workmen. Because put quite simply, these paintings they produce are anything but work a day. Thank you. I think we're going to have a few questions if anyone has any. Huh?
Oh, yes. Being very fond of trifles, I just want to know where the reproductions are. Like right now, where can you buy the reproductions?
Well, it's a good question, reproductions, because there isn't a day that goes by in the Fan Museum where a visitor doesn't say, where can I get an 18th century reproduction?
I like this one.
It's just, where can I get a reprint Sickert? There really isn't. Someone needs to go into business because nobody is really doing reproduction fans. And I tell you what, Downton Abbey, do you know Downton? I'm sure you know Downton Abbey. Downton Abbey recently came to us. And good on them for doing their homework. And they wanted to have a fan reproduced from our collection to show in the series. But in fact, the director of my museum said, no, you're not doing that, absolutely not. She didn't like that at all. So she actually accompanied the fan to the sets. And in fact, one of our fans, an amazing late 19th century fan from Alexander, was held by the Duchess Dowager. It was quite a moment. But I think if there's anyone out there who's got a business, some business acumen, go into fan reproduction. Any more questions?
What is the best way to maintain fans? I have like 300 fans.
Wow.
On my collection.
You are a serious collector. Well, again, there are so many different opinions on how to preserve, how to store your fans. At the Fan Museum, we store our folding fans closed. Number one, room. We have 5,000 of them. If we were to store them open, we'd need new premises. But actually, I think storing your folding fans closed is probably the best way because the leaf is then away from light, the pleats are being preserved. If you keep them open, they're going to slacken with time. I don't feel that's the best way. I would put them in drawers. We're very lucky. All our drawers at the Fan Museum are lined with cedar of Lebanon, which bugs hate. But I would suggest, just keep them away from light and fluctuations in temperature. Perhaps wrap each one in acid-free tissue. That should do it.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Was the wearing of fans seasonal?
Well, there was, yeah, but actually there were fans for all seasons. And certainly we have to remember that fans follow fashion. And so in that respect, there would have been fans for summer. You had your lace lace certainly was wonderful in the summer, but also very early on in the history of fans, they transcend this kind of cooling device status. And so even in the very colder countries, Switzerland and above, they're using fans throughout the year. As you will know, they're status symbols. So they are using them, I mean, one wants to maintain status from January to December. All year round.
Yes, merely to respond to the gentleman's question about storage and conservation. Of course, Lucy Commodore, who has been with the Cooper Hewitt for 39 years and is in charge of all of their conservation, developed in the 80s what I consider to be probably one of the most professional and best ways of storing, fans. And I don't think her developments then have been superseded by anybody, and I know have been emulated by the Fan Museum in London. That I've known Felix Alexander since before the museum opened. So, this museum, the Cooper Hewitt, has been outstanding in setting standards for conservation efforts.
Question over here, right down the other end. Oh, and one here. Yeah.
Sorry. Thank you very much for your interesting talk.
Pleasure.
I hope this question isn't beyond the scope of it. I used to work for a museum that had a decent collection of fans, and several have been cataloged as so-called World War I fans with banners of roosters, actually, which I guess were symbols of the First World War. And I was wondering if it was common for there to be political scenes or scenes related to patriotism on fans. Absolutely. Or what the function of these were.
Absolutely. I mean, in fact, talking of patriotism, that early English fan I showed you, the woodblock printed one, was celebrating the restoration of the monarchy. I mean, their fans have been used to communicate political beliefs, all sorts of strains of your character and personality. We even have at the Fan Museum a fan printed with the trial of Warren Hastings. You have current affairs. I mean, seriously, I go back to that opening statement, but fans are canvases upon which every facet of life itself has been presented. And anybody who thinks of them as these kind of innocuous kind of little feminine goodies with bevies of cherubs, God, I mean, there's just so much more to it. They run the whole gamut of life itself. It's all there. So if you're not necessarily interested in fans as fans, but you have a kind of social or cultural remit in some other form, you must go to fans because you will definitely glean something from them in some form or another. Yeah.
So I think we have time for maybe 2 more quick questions.
There's a lady down the front who's been holding her hand up for a very long time.
Thank you. Thank you. This is fascinating. I'm just really curious about the materiality of these objects, and specifically, you mentioned I was surprised to hear oil and varnish, particularly because those are heavier and I imagine would actually be more difficult to sort of be flirtatious with. But I'm in thinking about gouache and watercolor as being sort of the media that I'm most familiar with. And in terms of the lineage of those materials in illuminated manuscripts and miniature painting, those are arts that are also sort of liminal, and I'm just curious about the sort of resonance of that, of the materials that are used to make the fans. Is it because these are amateur materials? Is it because there's a certain wealth or status that's associated with the 16th century and 15th century illuminated manuscripts?
Yeah, it's really hard for me to say what. I mean, there are some practical reasons as to why fan painters would have used water-based pigments. There's a kind of practicality to. We have to remember that the fan is not a piece of fine art. It is folded, it is scored, it is opened, it is closed, it is wafted, it's mistreated, and your materials that you choose to work with, I think, are almost guided in a kind of practical sense. But certainly, when you look at there was a revival in tempera use on Italian fan leaves towards the end of the 18th century, and that undoubtedly comes back to a kind of a heritage looking back to antiquity, because they're painting these very ornate Neo-Pompeian designs using tempera. So I do think pigments and materials are not just used in the sense that there is a practical sense, but certainly there's a kind of a deeper, you're right, a cultural kind of resonance to those. Thank you.
Hi,
Hello.
you are adorable.
Okay. Blush now.
I know the subject of this lecture was European fan
Yeah.
painting, but did this tradition make its way to America?
Yeah.
Yes.
Certainly. You know what? There's some really fantastic fans in the Hewitt collection that were painted here in America. You had some wonderful fashion fan houses here in the later 19th century in particular. And also, we've discovered very recently in our own collection a fan, an ivory fan, Chinese, that we now have identified who it was made for. It was for an American lady. It's dated about 1790, so we definitely know that fans were already going over from China at a very early date. Certainly America has its own kind of microcosm, I would say, of industry and painting styles. And you know what, it does sit somewhere outside of what's happening in Europe and what's happening in the East. And I feel, I'm going to hold my hands up and say it's an area that we don't look at enough. You know, we find ourselves focusing on Europe or the East and kind of overlooking what happened in the States. And that's really not good. We should probably focus more on that. And I think certainly if you're a student here and you have access to the collection here, I suspect there are some really good projects to be had in that area. Yeah.
I can address that a little bit, sorry. In the United States here, we have a fan association of North America, FANA,
Yeah.
which I am membership chair. We
Yeah.
do have American fans. They're made out of Braintree, Mass. They're called Hunt and Allen,
Yeah.
that you can go on, and you can go on our FANA website at fanassociation.org to do more research and to look at all the different events that we have.
FANA is a fantastic organisation. Go FANA. We've met some wonderful fan enthusiasts through your organisation. Amazing. Okay.
Great. Thank you so
Thank you
much
very
for
much,
having me.
everybody.